What wanted to discuss actually was the Yeridah of Torah. You know, like the yeshivas. What's the problem with the yeshivas? What is the actual problem? They think that the Torah that they're delivering is the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu received at Sinai. That's what they think. And they really have no idea how far away they are from that. And this has to do with how do you divide human history? According to what criteria? You mean? Mm-hmm. We have human history for 5,783 years. What are the lines of demarcation? You know, it's like they try and divide history between the
Yeshu.
Yeah, after Yeshu, Jesus, and we call that the common era, and this called ancient history, medieval history, what that's before. You know, different parts of history. They use titles. But in actuality, what are the lines of demarcation that you can divide history? And another completely different way to divide history is according to the tzura, or the form of the Torah that exists. And no, you know, I never gave this share. Really, I never gave this share. But it's a whole different way of really understanding, a completely different way to understand the madrigas of Klal Yisrael, and so on. So in reality, well, what do you actually have in reality? You have the one mitzvah of Adam Rishon, the 7 mitzvahs, which is called 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, and then the Taryag mitzvahs. Why do you have these 3 categories of mitzvahs? And there's no clarity at all by anyone who teaches this. Why did Adam Rishon only have 1 mitzvah? And after the Chet, he had 7 mitzvahs by Noach and some before. And then he was given 613. What is those are 3 different lines. In other words, there was an absolute transformation based on the category of mitzvahs. You know what I mean? So the question is, what does this mean? Why do you have these 3 categories of mitzvahs? So that's the mitzvahs going up to Matan Torah. You know what I mean? And then at Matan Torah, this was a new category. But do we understand that new category? Not really. And then there was a descent, with the madrigas of the Torah descended according to certain criteria. And what I want to do is go through all of human history to notice what's happening to the Torah that we're receiving. And therefore it tells us where we are holding now. So this is it's called a hekuf. It'll give you a much clearer understanding of what's happening. Well, Adam Rishon was given one mitzvah. And after he did the sin, he was given 7 mitzvahs. Why? You don't have to know it, but...
I think I've heard you discuss it before.
Yes, and what's the central idea that I say?
The first one was Bein Adam L'Makom. It was because there was only Nama de Chisufa between him and Hashem. Once he sinned, it brought in Zoma to the world. That created another mask where you now saw humans as being also, you saw them in the form of multiplicity, and then you saw them also and had Nama de Chisufa with them because you realized you're not the only human anymore.
Right. So what does the 7 mitzvahs have that the one mitzvah of Adam Rishon did not have?
Bein Adam L'Chaveiro.
Good. Very good. Okay. So the first mitzvah of Adam Rishon was Ben Adam L'Makom.
Yeah.
Why? Because the problem of Dam L'Ksufa was only between Adam Rishon and God. Which means that the main question that presents is, what exactly was the addition? And the addition is mankind. So the question that you have to ask is, what's the difference between mankind before the Chet of Adam Rishon and mankind after the sin? That's the question included in that concept. Obviously, mankind after the sin were different than mankind before the sin. You know, there would have been a mankind, but what would have been their nature?
There would have been extensions of...
Right. Before the sin, they simply would have been extensions of Adam Rishon. And after the sin, suddenly these extensions became individuals. So there was like a new creation of the word me. Before the sin, a person referred to himself as me, but it was a totally different me than what they referred to themselves after the sin. So the word me changed. You know what I mean? Okay, good. That's 7 mitzvahs, and including the mitzvahs ben Adam L'Chaveroi, because now they became new subjects. They became real subjects. Before the sin, man, the people, the me of these people were extensions. They were not true subjects.
Mm. But Adam was still, meaning was Adam a true subject prior to that?
Yes. He was.
But everybody else was not.
Was not. But they were all included in Adam. Somehow there was certain, they was included in Adam.
Chava must have been, right? Because they say it wasn't she like attached to his body in some way?
Chava was still a person.
She was an individual subject?
She was part of the Nisoyan. And the rule is that only a subject needs to save himself from yichud pressure.
So she did too, or no?
So yeah, she was included. That's why she ate it herself. She did the sin first. It was her own sin.
Yeah, so she was a subject even too. But
So
their children were not, or would not have been.
Well, there was no childhood before the sin. You know, it's before the sin, there was no such thing as childhood. So the next question is, So what's the difference between the 7 mitzvahs, which now incorporate the mitzvahs bein adam v'chaveroi, and the Taryag mitzvahs? What did the Taryag mitzvahs that was given to the bris with Avraham Avinu, the bris bein Absalom with Avinu, what did that add? How did that change the concept of mitzvahs?
It created goyim, meaning because God wanted to eradicate the world, and so He said, or not necessarily, He said the tikkun.
It only that didn't create goyim. It's only because they refused to accept. The Ummah Ha'olam refused to accept the Taryag mitzvahs. That's why they became goyim. But what were the Taryag mitzvahs supposed to do? And I don't understand this. Most people don't know. They have no idea.
I don't know.
Well, then you don't know really what a Jew is.
Well, you've given cheer on it before.
Right.
About
What did it introduce? The Taryag mitzvahs introduced what concept?
Eretz Yisrael,
Yes, but not
and rehabilitation.
Rehabilitation. So what concept is included in rehabilitation?
Tshuva.
Okay.
Korbanos, Beis Hamikdash, Korban.
And what did that do for the person, the Zulasai?
It allowed him to be saved from din.
Okay, so it was provided a guarantee.
Guaranteed.
That's the key thing. Which Chazal say, Yisrael, Afa B'Shechota Yisraelu. So even though a person sinned, you know what I mean? He was still a Yisrael. You know, he had an imprint. A Jew was a person who was a guaranteed Zulasai. Whereas everyone before the Taryag mitzvahs were unguaranteed Zulasais.
So long as they didn't become Moser.
Okay, right. So now we're up to Matna Torah. So we have an idea of what means 1, 7, 6, 13. Now, what was the Torah at Har Sinai? In other words, what was the format of the Taryag mitzvahs?
What was it supposed to be, or what did it come down as?
What was it supposed to be?
In the form of nun.
Right. So the original Taryag mitzvahs that were given in Har Sinai were supposed to be the whole Torah. You know, the Torah, the Nun. So that's the Messianic Torah. You know, and that's called the Luchos Rishonos, the first tablets. Now, I don't know if they were supposed to receive the Nun itself at Matan Torah, or they were supposed to start, the Nun was revealed to them, and they were supposed to start it and work their way up. So I don't know if it was progressive or instantaneous. The Nun shall be the 50th gate, which is the complete gate. You know, it was given from the Luchos Rishonos. You had in the Luchos Rishonos, in the first tablets, the ability to access. The question is access all 50 gates. Now, I don't think you can access it in one shot, but progressively you can access all of them from the Luchos Rishonos. It was all available. You understand? It was the concept of availability, of access. Now we're going to look at the Luchos Rishonos. What happened? There was a deterioration of that down to today. And what are the steps in the deterioration? So then suddenly you have a clear vision of all the forms of the Torah from Adam Rishon to the Messianic period. And, no one has really ever done this, and so on. So what happened was the Chet of the Egel. The Chet of the Egel did something. It took away the access to the Nun. So the Torah was put in a different form. And that's the form we have now. And this new form was given a second time to Moshe Rabbeinu in the form of Luchos Shnius. So the Torah that we have now is not the same as the original Torah. The difference is, one had the Torah with the access to the Nun, and the Torah that we have today does not have the access to the Nun. It only has access to the 49 levels. So it's a different form. And that second Luchos were given on Yom Kippur. So suddenly the whole Torah is in a different structure. In other words, the Luchos Rishonos, this is very important, the Luchos Rishonos had only one structure. You know what I mean? Where you can access all 50. But there was only one structure. Today, the structure is two structures. In other words, you could no longer access the Nun, which was placed in the Panemius of the Torah, and that the Torah was given a Keli as a Chitzonius. So suddenly the Torah had a new structure of Chitzonius and Panemius. And you could only access the Chitzonius. You could not access the Panemius. So structurally there was a change. So the succeeding years of the whole Tanakh was simply the Jews. The Torah was in the form of a duality, of a double structure, Chitzonius and Panemius. And if Klal Yisrael would have kept the Torah completely in terms of the mitzvahs ben Adam Chaveroi and the mitzvahs ben Adam L'Mokom, they would have been zocha to a period called the Messianic period, which then with the gift of the Messianic period is access to the 50. But this structure I don't think exists before, where Jewish history would not have been divided into something called pre-Messianic and post-Messianic as two distinct periods in history. If the Chet of the Egel wasn't done, it would have all been Messianic, where you work your way up to the 50th level, and including the 50th level. So the whole structure of Chinuch changed completely because of the Chet of the Egel. You see what I'm saying? Until when? Well, God wanted Klal Yisrael to do two things. The Torah really has two different types of mitzvahs. Ben Adam L'Mokom, between man and God, and Ben Adam Chaveru, between man and man. between man and God is the concept of what do you call it? Was the concept of the stature of a godly nation. And the second concept, the second concept was the concept of a unified nation, of the achdus of the Zolosai. So the first thing, which is called a Goy Kodesh. A Goy Kodesh refers to the achdus between the Zolosai and God. And there was a second concept called Mamlechas Kohanim, which was the concept of what? Of the achdus of the Zolosai. Intra. One was inter, the man and God, and the second concept of Mamlechas Kohanim was intra, from the Zolosai itself.
Goy Kadosh was also Ben Adam Lechaver, or that's Makom?
Bein Adam L'Makom. Was really Bein Adam L'Makom. What does the word Kodesh mean? What is the concept of Kedusha?
Separate, sanctified.
Of what? Separate from what? So Rashi touches up, Kodesh means Purushim. Purushim means that you're separating yourself from something. From what?
Word Gashmias.
From Gashmias. Because what does Gashmias show us that's not true?
Independence. Well, it leads to that, to believe that we're independent of God.
So it shows me the concept of multiplicity. That's the concept which is shown in Gashmias. And Kedusha really is not the absence really of the physical universe, the Gashmias. It's the absence of multiplicity between me and God. So therefore, I don't refer to God as a you, I refer to him as an inner me. That's contained in the mitzvah of Ahavta Hashem L'kacha. That idea. Physicality indicates multiplicity, and Kedusha is the absence of multiplicity. So the function of the Torah is to create a unity between you and God. That's what Kedusha really is. Doesn't mean some holiness, like a halo or something. They have the word holy, they don't even know what the word holy means.
Someone who's really Kaddish, they just see the yichud of Hashem.
Right. Kedusha has to do with achdus, or dveikus between you and the Bnei Hashem. So Klal Yisrael kept all the mitzvahs, basically, Ben Adam L'Makom. But Ben Adam L'Chaveru, they failed. So, they got to the point, the next critical juncture in history, fundamentally, is the Messianic period, in the year 4000. So God gave them about 1500 years to do the Tayyag mitzvahs as best as they could. And what they failed miserably was in terms of the achdus of Klal Yisrael. So even though the Messianic period started, how do I know? Because suddenly Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef was able to what? Pierce the dual structure of Torah and locate the Nun. Now how did he do that?
Mashiach.
He was Mashiach. But how did he do it? He doesn't say anything in the Gemara.
Because became available at that time.
It became available, but it didn't become available just passively. He had to do something, Rabbi Akiva. And what he had to do was to break the outside keli, which is the chesonius, and enter into the pneumius. You know, this was an actual activity that he did.
Yeah, but how did he do that?
With the seichel. He knew the method. He knew how to do it. We don't know how. The Gemara does not speak about how he did it. Now the other three Tanoim who attempted that also didn't have clarity in that methodology. So in the end that they failed. But Rabbi Akiva had clarity in that methodology. Total clarity. He was able to pierce the pneumius through the chesonius and extricate the nun. So finally, the nun was available. So that juncture between Klal Yisrael keeping the Torah and working its way up to the nun, which should have been done by the Luchos Rishonos, all at the same time, or at least in one journey, now was put in two journeys. Now first you had to acquire the 49 levels, and then the Mashiach would arrive and give you the 50th level. Because the structure of the Torah changed. It was duality by the time of Rabbi Akiva. But that was the period when it was supposed to happen. Instead, something new happened. Something new happened to the Torah that completely changed everything. Because the Jews were not zocher to that level of the 50 gates. Therefore, they were not zocher to the Geula. So what happened to the Torah?
A good chunk of it was wiped out in the sense that there's no Beis HaMikdash anymore. You can't do a majority of the Torah.
But besides, that's what happened to the Beis HaMikdash. That's what happened to their ability to do certain mitzvahs. But my question is, what happened to the structure of the Torah?
Oh, it went into Gullus. Meaning it went into the form of Mishnayos and Gemara.
It was written down as a book.
Yeah.
It was recorded as a book. What book? The Mishnah and the Brises and the Toseftas. And then it was further commented on as Gemara, which is a commentary. So they never had that before. So how did people learn Torah before? If there was never a textbook. Well, that wasn't a textbook either. But how did they learn before?
Baal Peh.
They learned about Baal Peh, but where did they learn it from? They didn't have the what?
The Rabbi.
The teachers, the Rabbayim. In other words, they were taught personally the Torah. They were not taught by looking at a book. But it was a man-to-man relationship. The teacher was a completely different entity then than he is now after Rabbi Akiva. So that's why the eco-relationship between the Talmud and the Rebbe was called Shimush, which no longer existed. So we have no concept of that. You see, something tremendously switched when it was decided that Rabbi Akiva would not be the final Mashiach. And that was the whole educational system. Now, what was the education system like before? We don't know. But something worse happened of a major degree. And what was that, you think?
The Gemara.
And why was the Gemara a complete new methodology of Gemara, of learning?
Because it wasn't meant for teaching, like people. It was meant for the poskim.
It was a record and so on. So how did that change the whole style of Torah? That was a vast change. And how would you describe that vast change? First of all, the books that were written were not textbooks. That's number one. But now, what became the Ika Avodah in learning Torah? What does it mean, Talmud Torah?
Figuring out what the person's trying to say.
Good. As opposed to
learning what the truth is directly from the source.
So the Torah was not learned as a series of phenomena or events like science. Newton wrote a book called the Principia. When you study the book written by Isaac Newton, the Principia, how are you supposed to learn that? Well, you learned in their book of a concept called gravity. So what did you want to know? Is there such a thing as gravity? How does it work? In other words, you were looking at the reality of the mitzvah. The mitzvah was simply an indication of a certain reality in the world of Ruchnius. And what you were studying was the reality, what's called the phenomenon, the event. But now, you're not studying an event anymore. What are you studying? What somebody's saying. Do you see what happened, the major change? Because suddenly Torah lost its garb, its surah of being a chokhmah. You know what a chokhmah means? You're trying to explain an event. What is gravity? What is electromagnetism? How does it work? How does it operate? You're trying to explain the parameters, the cause and effect relationships in the event itself. Because you understand that it is an event. But once Gemara was placed in a textbook, and it wasn't placed in a textbook, it was placed in a record written for poskim, then the source of study became not what explains the event, but what did he say? What did this guy say? It's like studying not the facts of the Principian of Newton, but you're just trying to understand, you're trying to translate the Principia so you understand what he's saying. That's not Chokhmah.
But weren't they discussing those concepts?
What, the events?
Yeah, they were discussing the events.
How do you know?
They're asking what is Borer, what are the Gedarim of Borer, they just have different opinions on.
But there's a difference. They were trying to understand the event only in terms of what the guy's saying. But how deep was their analysis of the event itself?
Is it the Tanaim you're saying, or?
The Amoraim.
Amoraim.
Yeah. There was something else that happened also. Before Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, there was no machlekes. They all had one shita. After, when they put the whole thing in the Mishnah, everything came into a machlekes. There was now two views on what the guy was saying, or what, and as he described the mitzvahs. So what happened is, not only did Torah disguise, so it's called the first Yeridah, the first descent, was that the Torah no longer contained a form which revealed the 50th gate. That was the Luchas Shnias. And after Rabbi Kiva, the Torah became what? The Torah became the analysis of a text, of a book, and that's called the literary analysis, not the conceptual analysis of the event. And this is something which is completely unknown. Everyone thinks that when they learn Gemara now, that's the highest level what they're learning. That is the lowest level. Because you simply has all these mafoshim are designed to tell you what the guy is saying. And if he's consistent in what he's saying, there is no analysis of why the thing happened. For example, Tumas Mace and Tumas Sheretz. A Sheretz gives over Tumah by touching it, a dead Sheretz. A dead body gives over Tumah by Ohel. It radiates the Tumah out of the body, up. But why does this happen? What is the actual event itself that causes a dead body to radiate Tumah outside of the body? Whereas with the Sheretz, you actually have to touch the Sheretz. So they never explored the phenomena. So before the death of Rabbi Akiva, it was a phenomenological discussion. I mean, I don't really know this, but I assume that it was phenomenological. And therefore it was a chokhmah. But after, it was no longer a chokhmah. Trying to figure out what somebody's saying is a literary analysis, not the phenomenological analysis. So that shut down the whole thing. Not only that, the books that were presenting it were not even textbooks. So everyone was studying by a journal. A book written by professionals, for professionals. That became the textbook. So the whole study of Torah went down a second Yeridah. You know what I mean? The first one was that the Luchas Rishonis became the Luchas Shnias. And the Luchas Shnias had a double structure of Chetzonis Panimis, which didn't exist in the Luchas Rishonis. And then by the time of Rabbi Akiva, this book that had these two things, he was able to dismiss the Chetzonius and get to the Pneumius. But as he dismissed that, what happened? No longer was the study of, you weren't studying the phenomena. What is each mitzvah? What are the principles of each mitzvah? What is it affecting in the spiritual reality? You're simply trying to understand what somebody says. That's called a literary analysis. So from then on, the study of Torah will be a literary analysis. You understand? So the first descent was that the Torah study became divided into two things, a Panimis and a Chetzonius. But it was still studied as a phenomenologically. So how did the Nevi'im study the Torah? You know what I mean? How did they study the Torah?
As you described.
The phenomena. Why is this true? Means what's the mechanism that defines how it operates? They weren't interested in what a guy was saying. They was interested in how does this mechanism work? What is the cause and effect relationship and the parameters of the mechanism itself, of the events? So it completely changed in the second descent. The second descent it was no longer phenomenological, it was literary. So they would break their heads on what a guy was saying. Not only that, there was also the concept of machlokas. The Torah as it's presented in the Mishnayos was filled with machlokas. What's that?
Was that a representation of the way the people are interacting with one another?
Yes, we'll get to that in a second. So that's called the second descent of the Torah. The first descent was the disappearance of the Nun, because the Torah was changed in its form. But they still kept it as a phenomenological study. The second descent of the Torah was what? Was a completely different thing, where the Torah was represented by a journal, not by Rebbe to Talmud, a personal relationship, which was conducted, which is called Shimush. But they would study a book, and that book which they studied wasn't even a textbook, it was a journal. So in other words, where did the Torah go? It went into a total darkness. Tigbora Sarah, which is the principle of darkness, put the whole Torah into what? Golus. Because when the Torah study is what is done, not phenomenologically, but literally, that's the Golus of Torah. Because you never understand from then on anything at all. Besides the fact that it was fractured into many different opinions. Almost every halach in the Torah has a machlokes, which didn't exist before Hillel and Shammai. You understand? So the second descent was to keep busy trying to figure out the pshat. What's the pshat? So we're very far away. And that's why the pasuk says, and what is that first Torah called? Ki mitzion teitzei Torah. Tzion is a state when the Torah is in the luchos rishonos. And when we say Hamarza Shechina Sol Tzion, we're saying, why isn't it like that now? Because the Shekhinah is completely invisible. So the Shekhinah has to return to the Torah so that the Torah can be seen again. It's now jumped into a different level where it's not Doimen LeChochma. Science is a phenomenological study. Halachas are not. A literary study. So you see what I'm saying? And the only one who could restore to its phenomenological aspect is the Mashiach at the end of time, or whenever he comes. So had Rabbi Akiva succeeded in becoming Mashiach, there would be no Mishnah, no Gemara. We would return to the days of old, where the 50th gate would be visible from the luchos rishonos, without the presence of such machlekes. So the Torah has descended 2 levels down. And that's called the Golus of Torah. And that's the Golus of Klal Yisrael. People think that the Golus of Klal Yisrael is that they were scattered among the nations of the world. No. It wasn't that they were scattered. The Torah was put in the Golus. You know what I mean? The whole structure, because the Torah left the definition of Chochmah. Torah is no more learned like a Chochmah. Science is. Anything that has to do with Gashmias was allowed to remain phenomenologically. You know, understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So that's why, because it's phenomenological, you can have something like this, a phone where you can contact anyone in the world just by sitting here. Tremendous loss. And what was the reason for the loss? Because Klal Yisrael abandoned the second most important quality of the Torah, the Achdus of the Zerusai, the Mermos Kohanim, that Klal Yisrael has to be an organism, and they have to relate to each other as an organism, which Rabbi Akiva always said. So since Klal Yisrael fractured itself in terms of the way they related to each other, the Torah was fractured in the sense that it's completely out of sequence. So when you learn Torah, when you learn Chochmah, you learn A, B, C, D, E, 5 components. So how are you supposed to learn them? Well, first A, then B, then C, then D, then E. And how is it learned? Well, you start with A. No, you start with B. And then you go to C. You skip B. And then E. So it's completely out of sequence. And the absolutely amazing thing is what? The thing which I'm most amazed at is what? The Jews are supposed to be the smartest heads in the world. Yet all of them are blind to this event. You know, nobody ever talks about this event. Nobody ever talks about the structure of the Torah as it exists now. Everyone thinks when the Mashiach comes, we're going to have a lot of Beis Medrash and people are going to be learning Gemara all day long. So that's why it says, O Chodosh al Tzion Torah. That when Eretz Yisrael becomes a Tzion, when the Shekhinah returns, the Torah is an O Chodosh. Not really, it's not a new light, but the whole structure of it will change, and the whole approach will change. You know what I mean? And nobody even realizes this. Nobody even talks about that. And the strange thing, even the Ramchal doesn't talk about it, or the Vilna Gaon. The greatest of the Acharonim don't talk about it. So everybody is in a full trance. Because how could people who are the smartest people in the world, who concentrate on intellectual stuff, have no idea of what happened to their book, what happened to the Torah? So that's why when they read the pasuk, O Chodosh al Tzion Torah, they don't understand it. What do you mean, O Chodosh? We're not supposed to receive a new light? But they don't understand what that means. And that's why Chazal say, B'machshachem o shivani Hashem k'meis yoilam, God placed me in darkness like a cemetery. That's why the Gemara says, Zutam Bavli, because Chazal realized that second descent. The first descent was Torah left the 50th gate behind, so that the second Torah from Yom Kippur doesn't have access to the 50th gate. And the second descent of Torah is that the Torah left the category of Chochmah. And the Jews are in a total trance.
Gotta wake them up.
Yeah. So this is the course of Torah. You know, if you understand exactly the progression of what Torah looks like throughout history, you get a sense of the Yeridah of Klal Yisrael.
Is the Torah a reflection of us, I would assume?
Yeah.
State of the Torah.
Yep. But the important thing is to try and put the form of the Torah takes in each generation to the madregas of neshamas that exist in that generation. Somehow the form reflects the souls of the people in that generation. And it's truly laughable, it's tragic that nobody knows at all this concept. So that's the principle of Hashkafa. To understand what the Torah looks like throughout history and what it says about each generation, what its task is, or really what its choshech is. It's a study in choshech. It's a study in darkness. That's all it is. And that's what the Ramchal calls the Borus Hara, the ascendancy of evil. It's the ascendancy of choshech, of darkness, but a choshech that you can't see and you don't even know. That's what the Ramchal says. It's like a person is standing what? He's standing in the middle of the night and he says, hey, it's daylight. Do you see the sun? That's what it is. Where his mind is completely inverted to the concept of Chokhmah. And no one has any idea of the level of choshech that exists in Klal Yisrael.